Hey friends, tonight we embark on a gritty trek through a medieval European village where health hazards lurk in every muddy alley and coughing neighbor, and staying alive feels like a daily dice roll. Picture yourself stumbling from a time portal, your coarse-wool tunic scratching, your boots sinking into a stench-filled street, the air thick with smoke, livestock, and something you'd rather not name. This is no romantic nightly tale, it's a disease-ridden world where you might not survive a week without a fever or a bad flea bite. Trust me, you'd probably gag at the first whiff and pray for a bath that never comes. So, before you settle in, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly value what I share here. Leave a comment with your city and the current time. I'm curious who's braving this medieval mess with me. Now, dim the lights. Perhaps turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of a village in England, circa 1350, where ramshackle timber houses lean over a churned, muddy lane, their straw roofs sagging under recent rain. The air carries a heavy reek of manure, rotting straw, and wood smoke, and the village buzzes with activity. Peasants haul water from a murky stream. Children chase a scrawny dog, and a woman coughs wetly as she stirs a cauldron. You wear a rough wool tunic, already damp from the mist, your boots slipping as you navigate a path littered with refuse and animal droppings. The villagers' faces appear gaunt, some marked by sores or flushed with fever, and you notice a man limping, his leg bandaged with a grimy cloth. You are here to explore the medieval health hazards that plague this world, a landscape where disease is as common as rain, and you realize survival demands caution, lest you catch a fever from a stray touch or tainted air. You move deeper into the village, dodging a cart piled with turnips, and pause near a well where a girl draws water, her hands chapped and raw. The well's rim is slick with moss, and the bucket's rope looks frayed, hinting at the water's dubious purity. A villager named Agnes, her apron stained, approaches and offers you a wooden cup of ale, her smile weary but kind. "Drink, traveler," she says, "it's safer than water." You sip the sour brew, grimacing at its bite, and note her cough, a rasping sound that suggests something more than a passing chill. You are struck by the peril. Disease here is not just a risk, it is woven into daily life, from the air you breathe to the water you avoid. You are tempted to ask about her health, but a child's wail from a nearby house pulls your focus, and you wonder how anyone endures this village's constant threat of sickness, heart quickening as you tread carefully. Here is the principal historical fact: medieval Europe, spanning roughly 1000 to 1500 CE, suffered from widespread health challenges due to poor sanitation, limited medical knowledge, and frequent disease outbreaks, which claimed significant portions of the population, as evidenced by historical chronicles and archaeological findings. You observe Agnes now, her hands trembling as she wipes her brow. Villages like this one lacked waste management, with human and animal waste often contaminating water sources, fostering diseases such as dysentery and typhoid. The Black Death, peaking around 1347-1351, decimated up to half of Europe's population, spreading plague through fleas on rats, exacerbated by cramped, unclean conditions. Medical understanding relied on humoral theory, offering little defense against infections. You consider the well's murky water, recognizing its role as a silent killer, and you begin to admire the resilience of villagers who faced these hazards with scant remedies, striving to survive another day. You strive to blend in, but your grimace at the ale elicits a chuckle from a passing tanner, who tosses you a chunk of stale bread, saying, "Eat to settle the gut." You nibble the hard crust, grateful, and notice he wears a small leather pouch around his neck, etched with a cross, perhaps a protective charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, people wore plague amulets, leather or cloth pouches containing herbs or symbols believed to ward off disease, a practice found in archaeological digs but seldom recorded in texts. You examine the tanner's pouch, pondering whether it holds faith or merely hope, and it offers a quaint insight into how villagers sought protection against invisible threats, turning leather into talismans in a disease-ridden world. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Agnes calls you to help haul water, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to yawn at the labor's toil. You begin to sense the village's rhythm, a precarious dance of survival amid filth and fever. You overhear a man lamenting a foul ague that struck his son, prompting hushed murmurs from neighbors. You catch Agnes' worried glance, her cough persisting, and it dawns on you disease shapes not only bodies but bonds, with fear threading through every greeting or shared cup. You recall Chang'an's poetic streets, where verses lifted spirits, and recognize this village as a stark contrast, where health hazards dictate daily life, a grim stage for human endurance. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did medieval health crises primarily result from environmental factors or societal structures? Some scholars assert that poor sanitation and overcrowding drove disease, as seen in urban and village records. Others argue that social inequalities limited access to food or care for peasants worsened outcomes, a perspective in social histories. You observe Agnes' frail frame, wondering if it's the well or her poverty, and lean toward environment. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a chronicle's date over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the village, to an extent. You learn to sidestep refuse, endure the tunic's itch, and keep your cup steady to avoid spills. You pass the bread's crumbs to a scrawny sparrow, earning a flutter, and refocus on Agnes, who shows you how to draw water without toppling the bucket. You are fumbling, your arms aching, but her patient nod steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why health hazards defined this medieval world, not mere risks, but a constant shadow, testing villagers' grit in every muddy step. You glance at a passing cart, its driver coughing into his sleeve, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. The village's perils are just beginning, but you are hooked on its gritty struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the village's stench fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the tanner's plague amulet vivid in your mind. The amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of Agnes' cough, the child's wail, and all the villagers battling sickness in those muddy lanes. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another hazard's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating filth without spilling ale or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the village's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this disease-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You trudge away from the disease-riddled village, the rasping echo of Agnes' cough still lingering in your ears like a Subura tavern's mournful lute at closing hour. Your wool tunic clings damply, streaked with mud from the village lane, your boots caked with filth from dodging refuse piles. The tanner's plague amulet, a leather pouch etched with a cross, rests in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a token of your gritty brush with medieval health hazards. The air shifts from manure's reek to a denser stench of smoke and waste. As you enter a bustling English town, its cobblestone streets a maze of squalor. It is 1350 CE, and urban life teems with vigor yet festers with unseen threats. You are drawn to a crowded market square, where the unsanitary conditions of town life threaten every step. Welcome to a world of filthy streets and sick souls, where you wade through the muck that breeds medieval maladies. Fair warning, it is fouler than a Subura alley after market day, and surviving this urban mess will test your stomach more than a village well's murky sip. You navigate the town's main street, its cobblestones slick with mud, grease, and worse, the air thick with the stench of rotting fish, spilled ale, and open latrines spilling into gutters. Timber-framed shops lean precariously, their upper stories jutting over the street, casting shadows on vendors hawking bread, cloth, and dubious meat pies. You are surrounded by townsfolk merchants in stained cloaks, apprentices hauling barrels, and a woman with a flushed face coughing as she sells herbs. Your tunic chafes, your boots squelch through a puddle of unnameable sludge, and you notice a rat scurrying past, bold as a Subura thief. The market square buzzes, children dart through the crowd, a dog gnaws a bone in an alley, and a man with sores on his hands haggles over turnips. You are here to explore the unsanitary urban conditions that make health a fleeting dream. realizing each step risks a fever or worse, as the town's filth seeps into every breath. You edge toward a butcher's stall, its wooden counter slick with blood, flies swarming over scraps tossed into the street. A woman named Beatrice, her apron grimy, offers you a strip of dried mutton, her eyes weary but sharp. "Eat, traveler," she says, "it's better than the water." You chew the tough meat, its salt masking a faint rancid tang, and note her raspy breath, hinting at a lurking ailment. You are struck by the peril. Filth here is not merely a nuisance, it is a silent killer, breeding disease in every puddle and pile. You are tempted to ask about the town's health, but a shout from a nearby tanner's shop draws your gaze, where wastewater spills into the street, mingling with refuse. Your heart quickens as you sidestep the flow, wondering how anyone endures this urban quagmire, where sickness seems woven into the cobblestones themselves. Here is the principal historical fact: medieval European towns, from roughly 1000 to 1500 CE, were notoriously unsanitary, with poor waste management and overcrowded conditions fostering diseases that ravage populations, as evidenced by urban archaeological sites and contemporary chronicles. You observe Beatrice now, her hands wiping grease on her apron. Towns lacked systematic sanitation. Human and animal waste, food scraps, and industrial runoff polluted streets and water sources, spreading illnesses like dysentery, cholera, and plague. The Black Death, peaking around 1347–1351, thrived in such filth, killing up to half of urban dwellers, carried by fleas in rat-infested alleys. Limited infrastructure, such as open sewers or shared latrines, exacerbated health risks, with no germ theory to guide prevention. You consider the butcher's bloody scraps, recognizing their role in drawing rats and disease, and you begin to admire the townsfolk's tenacity, navigating this filthy maze with little more than hope and ale. You strive to blend in, but your wince at the mutton elicits a grin from a passing cooper, who tosses you a small apple, saying, "Bite to cleanse the palate." You crunch the tart fruit, grateful, and notice he wears a thin cord around his wrist, knotted with a small bone bead, perhaps a health charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval towns, some folk wore bone beads, tiny carved beads strung on cords as talismans against street-borne sickness, believed to appease spirits or purify the wearer, a practice found in burial sites, but seldom in written records. You examine the cooper's bead, pondering whether it holds faith or folklore, and it offers a quaint insight into how townsfolk sought protection amid urban filth, turning bone into charms against unseen threats. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Beatrice calls you to help carry a basket of herbs, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to gag at the street stench. You begin to sense the town's rhythm, a chaotic dance of commerce and contagion. You overhear a merchant lament a fevered apprentice lost to a recent outbreak, prompting hushed murmurs from vendors. You catch Beatrice's worried glance, her cough echoing the market's unease, and it dawns on you: filth not only sickens bodies but shadows spirits, with fear tainting every handshake or shared meal. You recall the village's muddy lanes, where Agnes' cough signaled peril, and recognize this town as a grimmer stage, where unsanitary conditions breed both disease and despair. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate: did medieval urban sanitation failures stem primarily from technological limits or cultural attitudes toward cleanliness? Some scholars assert that limited engineering, lacking piped water or sewage systems drove the crisis, as seen in archaeological urban layouts. Others argue that cultural norms, viewing filth as routine or divinely ordained, hindered reform, a perspective in social histories. You observe Beatrice's grimy hands, wondering if it's pipes or piety, and lean toward technology. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a sewer's design over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the town, to an extent. You learn to skirt puddles, endure the tunic's damp itch, and keep your basket steady to avoid spills. You pass the apple's core to a scrawny cat, earning a flick of its tail, and refocus on Beatrice, who shows you how to bundle herbs without bruising them. You are fumbling, your fingers clumsy, but her patient chuckle steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why filthy streets define this medieval world: not mere dirt, but a breeding ground, testing townsfolk's grit in every rancid step. You glance at a passing cart, its driver wiping sweat with a soiled cloth, and breathe shallowly, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. The town's perils deepen, but you are hooked on its sickly struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the town's stench fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the Cooper's bone bead vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the fevered apprentice, Agnes Village, and all the townsfolk battling sickness in those filthy streets. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another hazard's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating muck without spilling tea or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the town's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this disease-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You trudge away from the town's filthy streets, the rancid stench of Beatrice's butcher stall still clinging to your nostrils like a Subura alley's lingering reek after market day. Your wool tunic is damp with sweat and streaked with market grime, your boots heavy with caked mud from cobblestone sludge. The Cooper's bone bead, knotted on a cord, rests in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a token of your wade through medieval urban squalor. The air shifts from smoke and waste to a damp, earthy scent as you return to the rural English village, its muddy lanes quieter now, shadowed by an ominous hush. It is 1350 CE, and the Black Death sweeps through, leaving death and despair in its wake. You are drawn to a peasant's cottage, where the plague's toll on rural life unfolds in grim detail. Welcome to a world of peasant struggles against the plague, where you face its devastating grip on village life. Fair warning, it is bleaker than a Subura winter, and enduring this rural ordeal will test your spirit more than a town's foul gutters. You approach the village, its timber cottages sagging under straw roofs, the lane churned into mud by recent rains, the air thick with the sour smell of damp earth, livestock, and something faintly metallic, perhaps fear itself. The village is eerily subdued, fields lie untended, a cart stands abandoned, and a lone cow lows mournfully. You are surrounded by scattered peasants, their faces gaunt and pale, some wrapped in tattered cloaks, others tending to makeshift graves by a churchyard. Your tunic chafes, your boots squelch as you near a cottage, where a woman named Edith, her eyes red-rimmed, kneels by a straw pallet, tending a fevered child. You notice her hands tremble, marked by dark swellings, buboes under her arms, a chilling sign of plague. You are here to face the plague's toll, a scourge that spares neither young nor old, and you realize survival is a fragile hope in this death-haunted village, heart quickening as you step cautiously. You pause at the cottage door, its wood splintered and damp, the air inside heavy with the stench of sweat, herbs, and decay. Edith glances up, offering you a wooden bowl of thin barley gruel, her voice hoarse. Eat, traveler, to keep strength. You sip the watery broth, its blandness a stark contrast to the town's rancid mutton, and note her labored breath, each gasp a struggle against the plague's grip. You are struck by the devastation. Disease here is not just a hazard, it is a reaper, tearing through families and fields, leaving villages like this one half empty. You are tempted to ask about her child's fever, but a neighbor's wail from across the lane pierces the quiet, and you focus on Edith's weary eyes, wondering how peasants endure this plague's relentless march, your pulse rising as you brace against the cottage's oppressive gloom. Here is the principal historical fact: the Black Death, raging across Europe from 1347 to 1351 CE, was a catastrophic pandemic that killed an estimated 30 to 50% of the population, devastating rural communities with plagues spread by fleas on rats, as evidenced by contemporary chronicles and archaeological studies. You observe Edith now, her fingers brushing the child's flushed brow. Caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, the plague manifested in bubonic, septicemic, and pneumonic forms, with swollen lymph nodes, fevers, and rapid death. Rural areas, like this village, suffered acutely. Peasants lived close to livestock, lacked sanitation, and had minimal medical resources, making them vulnerable to flea bites and infected air. The plague disrupted agriculture, trade, and social bonds, leaving fields fallow and families shattered. You consider Edith's buboes, recognizing their deadly mark, and you begin to admire the peasant's endurance, facing this unseen killer with little more than gruel and grit. You strive to blend in, but your grimace at the gruel elicits a faint smile from a passing villager who tosses you a small onion, saying, "Bite to ward off miasma." You chew the sharp bulb, grateful, and notice he wears a cloth strip tied to his belt, marked with a crude star, perhaps a plague ward. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval rural communities, some peasants tied star-cloth fabric strips with star or cross patterns to their clothing, believed to repel plague's bad air, a practice found in village artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's cloth, pondering whether it holds faith or folklore, and it offers a quaint insight into how peasants sought protection amid the plague's terror, turning rags into talismans against death's shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Edith calls you to help fetch water, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to flinch at the cottage's fetid air. You begin to sense the village's pulse, a frail thread of survival amid grief and contagion. You overhear a man lament a plague-cursed harvest lost to untended fields, prompting hushed prayers from neighbors. You catch Edith's anguished glance, her child's fever unbroken, and it dawns on you the plague not only reaps lives but ravages livelihoods, with death shadowing every plow and prayer. You recall the town's filthy streets, where Beatrice's cough signaled peril, and recognize this village as a grimmer stage, where the Black Death's toll crushes rural hopes. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did the Black Death's rural devastation primarily result from biological factors or social vulnerabilities? Some scholars assert that the plague's biology, flea vectors, and poor hygiene drove its spread, as seen in epidemiological studies. Others argue that social conditions, peasant poverty, and feudal obligations worsened its impact, a perspective in social histories. You observe Edith's frail frame, wondering if it's fleas or feudalism, and lean toward biology. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a chronicle's toll over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the village, to an extent. You learn to tread lightly, endure the tunic's damp itch, and keep your bowl steady to avoid spills. You pass the onion's peel to a scrawny sparrow, earning a flutter, and refocus on Edith, who shows you how to fetch water without stirring sediment. You are fumbling, your arms weary, but her hoarse encouragement steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why the plague defined this medieval world, not mere sickness, but a scourge, testing peasants' resolve in every fevered breath. You glance at a passing mourner, his cloak stained with earth from a fresh grave, and breathe shallowly, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. The plague's toll deepens, but you are hooked on its tragic struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the village's gloom fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villager's star-cloth vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the cursed harvest, Beatrice's town, and all the peasants battling plague in those muddy lanes. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another sorrow's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating death without spilling gruel or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the village's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this disease-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You trudge away from the plague-stricken village, the anguished weight of Edith's fevered child and her own buboes still pressing on your heart like a Subura lament fading into twilight. Your wool tunic is damp with village mist, streaked with mud from muddy lanes, your boots gritty from graveside earth. The villager's star cloth, tied to ward off miasma, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a token of your harrowing brush with the Black Death's rural toll. The air shifts from damp earth to a faint whiff of wood smoke and lavender as you approach a noble's manor perched on a hill, its stone walls looming over the village's sorrow. It is 1350 CE, and the plague spares neither peasant nor lord, Yet the elite pursue bizarre cures in their gilded halls. You are drawn to the manor's courtyard, where a noble's dubious medical treatments unfold in strange splendor. Welcome to a world of aristocratic remedies, where you witness the elite's odd attempts to defy disease. Fair warning, it is weirder than a Subura quack's potion stall, and enduring this noble spectacle will test your credulity more than a peasant's gruel. You step into the manor's courtyard, its flagstones swept clean, the air tinged with herbs, wax, and a faint metallic scent from a brazier burning incense. Tapestries hang from wooden galleries, and servants scurry, carrying silver trays of wine and linen cloths. You are surrounded by the noble household knights in padded doublets, ladies in velvet gowns, and a physician in a long robe, his face masked with a leather beak stuffed with herbs. Your tunic chafes, your boots leave muddy prints as you edge toward a canopy where Lord Reginald, pale and sweating, reclines on a cushioned bench, attended by the physician. You notice his arm, marked by dark swellings, a grim echo of Edith's plague signs, yet he sips a golden goblet of something pungent. You are here to witness the elite's bizarre cures, treatments as lavish as they are dubious, and you realize even wealth cannot shield nobles from the plague's grasp. Heart quickening as you observe this strange ritual unfold. You stand near the canopy, the brazier's smoke stinging your eyes, as the physician, Master Gilbert, applies a poultice of crushed herbs and pigeon dung to Lord Reginald's buboes, chanting Latin prayers. A servant offers you a clay cup of spiced wine, her hands trembling, whispering, "Drink, traveler," for vigor. You sip the heady brew, its cloves masking a bitter undertone, and note her flushed cheeks, hinting at fever's touch. You are struck by the absurdity these cures, from dung to prayer, are not remedies but rituals, born of desperation and dogma, far from the village's meager gruel. You are tempted to question the poultice's stench, but a lattice gasp as Reginald winces pulls your focus, and you wonder how nobles cling to such odd treatments, your pulse rising as you navigate the courtyard's perfumed haze, wary of the plague's unseen reach. Here is the principal historical fact in medieval Europe, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE. The nobility accessed medical treatments that were often expensive and elaborate, but largely ineffective, rooted in humoral theory and religious beliefs, as evidenced by medical manuscripts and noble household accounts. You observe Master Gilbert now, his hands smearing the poultice with practiced calm. Elite medicine relied on balancing the bodus for humor's blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile using methods like bloodletting, herbal concoctions, and animal-based remedies. During the Black Death 1347-1351 CE, nobles sought costly treatments, such as poultices of dung or precious metals, believing wealth could buy health. Yet plague mortality remained high, with no understanding of bacterial transmission. These practices, while privileged, offered little advantage over peasant remedies, highlighting medicine's limits. You consider Reginald's goblet, likely laced with gold or herbs, recognizing its futility, and you begin to admire the noble's stubborn hope, facing plague with gilded nonsense. You strive to blend in, but your wince at the wine elicits a smirk from a servant, who tosses you a small dried fig, murmuring, "Eat for health's grace." You chew the sweet fruit, grateful, and notice he wears a silver ring etched with a crescent moon, perhaps a curative charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval noble households, some wore moon rings, silver bands with lunar or star motifs as talismans to balance humors, believed to align the body with celestial forces, a practice found in manor inventories but seldom in medical texts. You examine the servant's ring, pondering whether it holds superstition or status, and it offers a quaint insight into how nobles sought cosmic aid against disease, turning silver into charms amid plague's terror. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Gilbert calls you to hold a basin for Reginald's treatment, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to gag at the poultice's reek. You begin to sense the manor's rhythm, a fragile dance of privilege and panic. You overhear a knight lament a fallen cousin lost to plague despite costly cures, prompting hushed murmurs from ladies. You catch Gilbert's stern glance, his mask bobbing as he adjusts the poultice, And it dawns on you these treatments not only fail bodies but fray spirits, with fear shadowing every gilded goblet or chanted prayer. You recall Edith's village cottage, where gruel offered scant hope, and recognize this manor as a richer, yet equally doomed stage, where dubious cures mirror peasant struggles against the Black Death. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate: did medieval noble medicine reflect scientific ambition or entrenched superstition? Some scholars assert it aimed for progress, blending Greek and Arabic texts with experimentation, as seen in medical treatises. Others argue it was superstition tethered to religious and astrological dogma, a perspective in intellectual histories. You observe Gilbert's Latin chant, wondering if it's study or spell, and lean towards superstition. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a manuscript source over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the manner to an extent. You learn to stand discreetly, endure the tunic's itchy damp, and keep the basin steady to avoid spills. You pass the fig's pit to a scrawny sparrow perched on a beam, earning a flutter, and refocus on Gilbert, who instructs you to hold the basin level during Reginald's groans. You are fumbling, your arms trembling, but his curt nod steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why dubious cures defined this medieval elite, not mere treatments, but delusions, testing nobles' faith in every stinking poultice. You glance at a passing servant, her cough muffled by a cloth, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. The plague's grip tightens, but you are hooked on its noble folly. You return to the Subura's lanes, the manor's incense fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the servant's moon ring vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the fallen cousin, Edith's child, and all the nobles chasing cures in those gilded halls. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another remedy's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating plague without spilling wine or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the manor's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this disease-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart the noble's manor, the pungent reek of Master Gilbert's pigeon dung poultice still stinging your senses like a Subura apothecary's failed brew. Your wool tunic clings damply, streaked with manor dust, your boots gritty from flagstone paths. The servant's moon ring, etched with a crescent, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a token of your bewildering glimpse into the elite's dubious cures. The air shifts from incense and lavender to a crisp, earthy scent as you approach a monastery nestled in a wooded valley, its stone walls glowing faintly under moonlight. It is 1350 CE, and the Black Death ravages England, yet monks tend gardens of healing herbs, seeking remedies amid plague shadow. You are drawn to the monastery's herb garden, where the scent of mint and sage promises solace. Welcome to a world of monks' herbal remedies, where you explore their efforts to heal with nature's bounty. Fair warning, it is greener than a Subura meadow, but navigating this garden's hope will test your patience more than a noble's gilded folly. You step through the monastery's arched gate, its courtyard paved with smooth stones, the air fresh with damp soil, crushed herbs, and the faint hum of chanted vespers from a distant chapel. Wooden trellises bear climbing vines, and a well gurgles softly, its water clearer than the village's murky stream. You are surrounded by monks in coarse robes. Some sweep paths, others kneel in prayer, and a herbalist monk named Brother Thomas, his hands calloused, tends a garden bed of lavender and thyme. Your tunic itches, your boots leave muddy prints as you approach the garden, where rows of plants rosemary, fennel, and comfrey sway in the breeze. You notice Brother Thomas' face, lined but calm, though his eyes betray worry, perhaps for plague-stricken villagers seeking aid. You are here to explore the monk's herbal remedies, a blend of faith and flora against disease, and you realize even these gardens offer no certain shield from the Black Death, heart quickening as you tread gently among the herbs. You pause by a bed of sage, its leaves soft under your fingers, as Brother Thomas plucks sprigs, explaining their use for fevers. He offers you a clay bowl of herbed broth, his voice steady. Drink, traveler, for the bodis ease. You sip the warm liquid, its minty tang a relief after the manor's spiced wine, and note his careful movements, grinding herbs with a pestle, his robe stained with green. You are struck by the contrast these remedies, rooted in nature, seem saner than Lord Reginald's dung poultices, yet their efficacy remains uncertain against plague's wrath. You are tempted to ask about the herb's powers, but a monk's cough from the cloister pulls your focus, and you wonder how these gardens sustain hope in a death-haunted world, your pulse rising as you navigate the monastery's quiet promise, wary of the plague's unseen reach. Here is the principal historical fact in medieval Europe. From approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, monasteries served as centers of medical knowledge, with monks cultivating herb gardens to produce remedies for ailments, including during the Black Death, as evidenced by monastic records and archaeological garden sites. You observe Brother Thomas now, his pestle rhythmic as he prepares a salve. Monastic medicine drew from classical texts like Galen and Dioscorides, and Christian charity, with monks growing plants such as sage, mint, and yarrow to treat fevers, wounds, and infections. During the Black Death, 1347-1351 CE, monasteries offered care to the sick, using herbal decoctions and salves, though these remedies could not combat Yersinia pestis, the plague's bacterial cause. Gardens provided food and medicine, sustaining communities, but monks faced high mortality, with no germ theory to guide them. You consider the sage leaves, recognizing their earnest intent, and you begin to admire the monk's dedication, tending herbs amid plague's relentless toll. You strive to blend in, but your grimace at the broth elicits a gentle smile from a novice monk, who tosses you a small sprig of rosemary, murmuring, "Smell for strength." You inhale the piney scent, grateful, and notice he wears a woven cord around his wrist, knotted with a leaf pattern, perhaps a garden charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval monasteries, some monks wore leaf cords woven strands with leaf or vine motifs as tokens of their herbal work, believed to bless healing efforts or honor nature's gifts, a practice found in monastic artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the novice's cord, pondering whether it holds faith or tradition, and it offers a quaint insight into how monks bound their craft to spirituality, turning cords into charms against disease's shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Brother Thomas calls you to help crush mint leaves, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to sneeze at the garden's potent air. You begin to sense the monastery's rhythm, a quiet blend of prayer and purpose. You overhear a monk lament a plague-struck village beyond the valley, prompting hushed prayers from his brothers. You catch Brother Thomas' worried glance, his cough echoing the cloister's unease, and it dawns on you herbal remedies not only treat bodies but anchor souls, with hope threading through every leaf and salve. You recall Lord Reginald's manor, where dung poultices mocked reason, and recognize this garden as a humbler stage, where monks' efforts against plague offer fragile solace. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate: did monastic herbal medicine represent a proto-scientific approach or a faith-driven ritual? Some scholars assert it was proto-scientific, building on classical knowledge and observation, as seen in herbal manuscripts. Others argue it was ritualistic, steeped in Christian symbolism and prayer, a perspective in religious studies. You observe Thomas' careful grinding, wondering if it's science or sacrament, and lean towards science. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a recipe's origin over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the garden, to an extent. You learn to tread lightly, endure the tunic's damp itch, and keep your pestle steady to avoid spills. You pass the rosemary sprig to a scrawny sparrow perched on a trellis, earning a flutter, and refocus on Brother Thomas, who shows you how to crush mint without bruising it. You are fumbling, your hands clumsy, but his patient nod steadies you, heart quickening. You begin to grasp why herbal remedies defined this medieval world, not mere cures, but acts of faith, testing monks' resolve in every fragrant leaf. You glance at a passing novice, his cough muffled by a cloth, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. The plague's shadow looms, but you are hooked on its verdant struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the monastery's herbs fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the novice's leaf chord vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the plague-struck village, Lord Reginald's cures, and all the monks tending gardens in those sacred walls. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another remedy's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating plague without spilling broth or your cover. You head toward your rented room. The monastery's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this disease-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart the monastery's fragrant herb garden, the earthy tang of Brother Thomas mint salve still lingering in your nostrils like a Subura herbalist's brew after a quiet dawn. Your wool tunic clings damply, dusted with garden soil, your straw sandals worn from monastery paths. The novice's leaf cord, woven to bless healing, rests in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a token of your hopeful glimpse into monks' herbal remedies. The air shifts from cedar and sage to a smoky, sour reek as you return to the bustling English town, its cobblestone streets choked with refuse and fear. It is 1350 CE, and the Black Death ravages all, driving the desperate to seek crude cures. You are drawn to a barber shop in the market square, where a barber-surgeon's sign, a red and white pole, sways above a door. Welcome to a world of barber-surgeons' risks, where you endure a crude operation amid the plague's chaos. Fair warning, it is grimmer than a Subura butcher's stall, and surviving this surgical ordeal will test your nerve more than a monk's bitter broth. You step into the barber shop, its wooden floor sticky with dried blood and ale, the air thick with the stench of sweat, vinegar, and singed hair from a nearby brazier. Shelves hold rusty tools, knives, saws, and leeches in jars, while a cracked mirror reflects flickering rushlights. You are surrounded by townsfolk, a merchant clutching his arm, a woman with a swollen jaw, and a barber-surgeon named Master Roger, his apron stained, his hands steady but calloused. Your tunic itches, your sandals squelch as you settle on a splintered bench, drawn by Roger's brisk preparations for a patient, a man named Hugh with a festering leg wound. You notice Roger's face, weathered but focused, though his quick glance at Hugh's blackened foot betrays doubt. You are here to endure the barber-surgeon's crude methods, a perilous blend of craft and chance, and you realize even these interventions offer no sure escape from plague's shadow, heart quickening as you brace for the operation's grim spectacle. You sit closer, the brazier's heat prickling your skin, as Roger sharpens a knife, instructing Hugh to bite a leather strap. A servant offers you a clay mug of sour ale, her eyes weary, murmuring, "Drink, traveler," for courage. You sip the bitter brew, its tang sharper than the monastery's herbed broth, and note her trembling hands, hinting at fever's touch. You are struck by the danger. Surgery here is not healing but hazard, with unsterile tools and no knowledge of infection risking death as much as disease. You are tempted to question the knife's rust, but Hugh's muffled groan as Roger cuts into the wound pulls your focus, and you wonder how anyone endures such crude care, your pulse racing as you navigate the shop's stifling air, wary of the plague's unseen grip. Here is the principal historical fact: in medieval Europe, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, barber-surgeons performed medical procedures, including amputations and wound treatments, often with crude tools and minimal training, contributing to high health risks, as evidenced by guild records and medical artifacts. You observe Master Roger now, his knife slicing with grim precision. Combining barbering with surgery, these practitioners served townsfolk and nobles, performing tasks from tooth pulling to trepanning, as physicians focused on theory. During the Black Death, 1347-1351 CE, barber-surgeons treated plague victims, using bloodletting, lancing buboes, or cauterization, unaware of bacterial causes like Yersinia pestis. Without sterilization or anesthesia, infections were rampant, with mortality rates high. You consider Hugh's wound, its pus a silent threat, and you begin to admire the barber-surgeon's resolve. wielding blades amid plague's terror with little more than grit and ale. You strive to blend in, but your flinch at Hugh's groan elicits a wry nod from a waiting apprentice, who tosses you a small clove, murmuring, "Chew for steady nerves." You bite the spicy bud, grateful, and notice he wears a leather strap around his neck, hung with a tiny iron key, perhaps a surgical charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval barber shops, some practitioners wore key pendants, small iron or bronze keys hung on straps as talismans to ensure surgical success, believed to unlock health or ward off bad spirits, a practice found in guild artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the apprentice's key, pondering whether it holds superstition or craft pride, and it offers a quaint insight into how barber-surgeons sought luck amid risky operations, turning metal into charms against death's shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Roger calls you to hold a cloth for Hugh's wound, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to recoil at the blood's metallic scent. You begin to sense the shop's rhythm, a tense blend of craft and crisis. You overhear a merchant lament a botched lancing that cost his brother's life, prompting hushed murmurs from the waiting crowd. You catch Roger's steady glance, his hands slick with blood, and it dawns on you surgery not only endangers bodies but burdens souls, with failure haunting every cut or cauterized stump. You recall Brother Thomas' monastery garden, where sage offered gentle hope, and recognize this shop as a bloodier stage, where barber-surgeons' risks mirror the plague's relentless toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate: did barber-surgeons' crude methods reflect practical necessity or a lack of medical rigor? Some scholars assert they were practical, meeting urgent needs with available skills, as seen in guild regulations. Others argue they lacked rigor, with minimal training and unsterile tools causing harm, a perspective in medical histories. You observe Roger's rusty knife, wondering if it's need or negligence, and lean toward necessity. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a tool's origin over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the shop, to an extent. You learn to stand firm, endure the tunic's damp itch, and keep the cloth steady to catch blood. You pass the clove's husk to a scrawny rat scurrying by, earning a twitch of its whiskers, and refocus on Roger, who instructs you to press the cloth gently during Hugh's moans. You are fumbling, your hands trembling, but his curt nod steadies you, heart racing. You begin to grasp why barber-surgeons' risks define this medieval world, not mere operations, but gambles, testing their craft in every bloody cut. You glance at a passing patient, her cough echoing the shop's dread, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. The plague's peril persists, but you are hooked on its surgical struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the barber shop's blood fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the apprentice's key pendant vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the botched lancing, Brother Thomas' herbs, and all the barber-surgeons wielding blades in those grim shops. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another operation's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating plague without spilling ale or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the town's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this disease-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart the barber shop's grim confines, the metallic stench of Hugh's festering wound and Master Roger's rusty knife still haunting your senses like a Subura slaughterhouse's grim residue. Your wool tunic clings damply, stained with blood and sweat, your straw sandals scuffed from the shop's sticky floor. The apprentice's key pendant, an iron charm for surgical luck, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a token of your harrowing brush with barber-surgeons' risky craft. The air shifts from vinegar and blood to a damp, earthy reek as you return to the rural English village, its muddy lanes hushed under a gray dawn. It is 1350 CE, and the Black Death shadow compounds a deeper woe hunger gnaws at every soul. You are drawn to a peasant's cottage, where a meager diet shapes daily survival. Welcome to a world of malnutrition's daily toll, where you survive on scraps that barely sustain life. Fair warning, it is leaner than a Subura beggar's bowl, and enduring this peasant fare will test your grit more than a barber's blade. You approach the village, its timber cottages sagging, the lane churned into mud, the air heavy with damp straw, livestock, and the faint bitterness of hunger. Fields lie half-tended, stalks drooping from neglect, and a skeletal dog sniffs an empty trough. You are surrounded by gaunt peasants, men in patched tunics, women with hollow cheeks, and children with swollen bellies, their eyes dull from want. Your tunic itches, your boots squelch as you near a cottage, where a woman named Marjorie, her hands bony, stirs a pot over a weak fire, her face etched with exhaustion. You notice her children, huddled on a straw mat, chewing crusts of stale bread, their limbs thin as reeds. You are here to survive on the peasant diet, a sparse regimen that fuels sickness as much as life, and you realize hunger is a silent plague, heart quickening as you step into the cottage's dim, smoky warmth. You settle by the hearth, the fire's faint glow barely cutting the chill, as Marjorie ladles a watery pottage of barley, onions, and wilted greens into a wooden bowl. She offers it to you, her voice faint. "Eat, traveler," to keep the cold at bay. You sip the thin gruel, its blandness a stark echo of Edith's village broth, and note her trembling hands, her frame frail from months of scarcity. You are struck by the hardship. Food here is not sustenance, but survival, a meager shield against famine and plague that weakens bodies and spirits alike. You are tempted to ask about their harvest, but a child's weak cough from the mat pulls your focus, and you wonder how peasants endure this daily toll, your pulse rising as you navigate the cottage's stifling air, wary of hunger's insidious grip. Here is the principal historical fact in medieval Europe. From approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, malnutrition was a pervasive health issue, particularly among peasants, due to limited food supplies, poor harvests, and feudal obligations, exacerbating disease and mortality, as evidenced by skeletal remains and manorial records. You observe Marjorie now, her fingers scraping the pot for scraps. Peasants relied on cereal-based diets, barley, rye, or oats supplemented by vegetables like onions or cabbage, with meat or fish rare. Crop failures, common due to weather or war, led to famines, weakening immune systems, and increasing susceptibility to infections like the Black Death 1347-1351 CE. Feudal dues and taxes further strained food access, leaving peasants undernourished, with children and women most vulnerable. You consider the pottage's thin gruel, recognizing its role in stunting lives, and you begin to admire the peasant's resilience, scraping by on scraps amid plague's terror. You strive to blend in, but your grimace at the gruel elicits a faint nod from a passing villager, who tosses you a small turnip, murmuring, "Bite for strength." You gnaw the bitter root, grateful, and notice he wears a woven band around his wrist, knotted with a grain pattern, perhaps a harvest charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some peasants wore grain bands woven cords with seed or stalk designs as talismans to ensure bountiful harvests, believed to appease earth spirits or bless meager meals, a practice found in rural artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's band, pondering whether it holds hope or habit, and it offers a quaint insight into how peasants sought fortune amid hunger, turning cords into charms against famine's shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Marjorie calls you to help grind barley, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to wince at the gruel's aftertaste. You begin to sense the cottage's rhythm, a frail pulse of survival amid want and woe. You overhear a man lament a starved winter that claimed his kin, prompting hushed murmurs from neighbors. You catch Marjorie's weary glance, her child's cough persisting, and it dawns on you malnutrition not only saps bodies but binds fates, with hunger threading through every shared crust or whispered prayer. You recall Master Roger's barber shop, where bloodletting mocked healing, and recognize this cottage as a humbler stage, where meager diets fuel the plague's relentless toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate: did medieval malnutrition primarily result from environmental constraints or feudal exploitation? Some scholars assert that harsh climates and poor soils drove scarcity, as seen in agricultural records. Others argue that feudal lords' taxes and labor demands stripped peasants of food, a perspective in economic histories. You observe Marjorie's bony hands, wondering if it's weather or lords, and lean toward exploitation. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a harvest yield over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the cottage, to an extent. You learn to grind barley slowly, endure the tunic's dusty itch, and keep your bowl steady to avoid spills. You pass the turnip's peel to a scrawny sparrow perched on a beam, earning a flutter, and refocus on Marjorie, who shows you how to sift grain without wasting it. You are fumbling, your hands clumsy, but her faint smile steadies you, heart racing. You begin to grasp why malnutrition defined this medieval world, not mere hunger, but a grinding toll, testing peasants' resolve in every scant spoonful. You glance at a passing child, his cough echoing the cottage's dread, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. The plague's misery deepens, but you are hooked on its starving struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the village's gloom fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villagers' grain band vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the starved winter, Master Roger's knife, and all the peasants scraping by in those dim cottages. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another famine's secrets. But you are more resilient than you thought, navigating hunger without spilling gruel or your cover. You head toward your rented room. The village's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this disease-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart Marjorie's dim cottage, the bitter aftertaste of her watery pottage still lingering on your tongue like a Subura beggar's meager broth after a lean day. Your wool tunic clings damply, dusted with barley flour, your straw sandals worn from village mud. The villagers' grain band, knotted to bless harvests, rests in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a token of your struggle with malnutrition's daily toll. The air remains heavy with damp straw and hunger's faint bitterness as you linger in the rural English village, its lanes shadowed by the Black Death's grim presence. It is 1350 CE, and amidst plague and famine, childbirth emerges as another perilous trial. You are drawn to a midwife's cottage, where a woman's cries pierce the dusk, signaling the deadly dangers of medieval childbirth. Welcome to a world where bringing life risks death, where you witness the harrowing perils of labor. Fair warning, it is grimmer than a Subura storm, and enduring this ordeal will test your heart more than a peasant's empty bowl. You approach the midwife's cottage, its timber walls patched with clay, the air thick with the scent of burning herbs, sweat, and a faint metallic tang that unsettles you. A straw roof sags low, and a flickering rushlight spills through a cracked shutter. You are surrounded by a tense hush. Neighbors linger outside, whispering prayers, while a cow lows mournfully in a nearby pen. Your tunic chafes, your sandals squelch as you step through the low door, drawn by the cries of a woman named Joan, her face contorted in pain on a straw pallet. A midwife named Alice, her hands gnarled but steady, kneels beside her, wiping Joan's brow with a damp cloth. You notice Joan's pallor, her breath ragged, and Alice's worried glance, hinting at complications beyond the village's meager means. You are here to witness childbirth's deadly dangers, a trial where survival is uncertain for mother and child, and you realize this cottage is a battlefield, heart quickening as you brace for the labor's grim struggle. You stand near the pallet, the rushlights flicker casting shadows, as Alice burns sage to purify the air, murmuring charms to ease Joan's pain. A neighbor offers you a clay cup of weak ale, her eyes anxious, whispering, "Drink, traveler, for fortitude." You sip the sour brew, its bite sharper than Marjorie's gruel, and note her trembling hands, perhaps touched by plague's fever. You are struck by the peril. Childbirth here is not a joyful rite, but a gamble, with no medicine or hygiene to guard against infection or mishap. You are tempted to ask about Joan's chances, but her sharp cry as Alice presses her belly pulls your focus, and you wonder how women endure such risks, your pulse racing as you navigate the cottage's stifling air, wary of the unseen threats that shadow every birth. Here is the principal historical fact in medieval Europe. From approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, childbirth was a leading cause of mortality for women and infants, with high risks due to limited medical knowledge, poor hygiene, and malnutrition, as evidenced by skeletal studies and church records. You observe Alice now, her hands guiding Joan through another contraction. Maternal mortality rates range from 10 to 20% per birth, with complications like hemorrhage, infection, or obstructed labor often fatal. Infant mortality was equally dire, with up to a third of newborns dying within a month, exacerbated by the Black Death 1347-1351 CE, which weakened mothers and spread puerperal fever. Midwives, like Alice, relied on experience, herbs, and prayers, but lacked surgical skills or sterile tools, leaving outcomes to chance. You consider Joan's ragged breath, recognizing its fragile thread, and you begin to admire the courage of women and midwives, facing childbirth's perils with little more than grit and faith. You strive to blend in, but your flinch at Joan's cry elicits a gentle nod from a neighbor, who tosses you a small dried apple, murmuring, "Chew for calm." You bite the tart fruit, grateful, and notice she wears a cloth pouch around her neck, embroidered with a rose, perhaps a birthing charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some women wore rose pouches, cloth sachets with rose or heart motifs during childbirth, believed to ease labor or protect mother and child from evil spirits, a practice found in household artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the neighbor's pouch, pondering whether it holds hope or tradition, and it offers a quaint insight into how women sought solace amid childbirth's dangers, turning cloth into talismans against death's shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Alice calls you to fetch hot water, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to recoil at the cottage's smoky heat. You begin to sense the cottage's rhythm, a desperate pulse of effort and endurance. You overhear a neighbor lament a lost mother from last month's labor, prompting hushed prayers from the crowd outside. You catch Alice's weary glance, her hands slick with sweat, and it dawns on you childbirth not only endangers lives but binds communities, with fear and hope threading through every cry or whispered charm. You recall Marjorie's starving cottage, where hunger sapped strength, and recognize this midwife's home as a fiercer stage, where childbirth's dangers amplify the Black Death's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did medieval childbirth mortality primarily result from biological limitations or social conditions? Some scholars assert that biology, malnutrition, and infection drove high death rates, as seen in medical studies. Others argue that social factors, lack of trained midwives or access to care, worsened outcomes, a perspective in gender histories. You observe Joan's frail form, wondering if it's her body or her world, and lean toward biology. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a midwife's skill over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the cottage, to an extent. You learn to move quietly, endure the tunic's sweaty cling, and keep the water bucket steady to avoid spills. You pass the apple's core to a scrawny sparrow perched on a rafter, earning a flutter, and refocus on Alice, who shows you how to warm cloths without scalding them. You are fumbling, your hands shaky, but her curt nod steadies you, heart racing. You begin to grasp why childbirth's dangers define this medieval world, not mere labor, but a lethal trial, testing women's resolve in every pained breath. You glance at a passing neighbor, her cough echoing the cottage's dread, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. The plague's terror persists, but you are hooked on its birthing struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the cottage's cries fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the neighbor's rose pouch vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the lost mother, Marjorie's hunger, and all the women battling childbirth in those dim cottages. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another labor's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating peril without spilling ale or your cover. You head toward your rented room, The villages pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this disease-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart the midwife's stifling cottage, the piercing echo of Joan's labor cries still ringing in your ears like a Subura storm's fading wail. Your wool tunic clings damply, stained with sweat and smoke, your straw sandals soggy from village mud. The neighbor's rose pouch, embroidered to ease childbirth, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a token of your harrowing glimpse into childbirth's deadly dangers. The air remains heavy with herbs and fear as you linger in the rural English village, its lanes shadowed by the Black Death's grim toll. It is 1350 CE, and amidst plague and peril, another affliction, leprosy, casts its victims into isolation. You are drawn to a leper colony on the village's outskirts, where a bell's mournful clang signals the shunned. Welcome to a world of lepers' isolated existence, where you visit a community cast out by fear and disease. Fair warning, it is lonelier than a Subura beggar's vigil, and enduring this outcast ordeal will test your compassion more than a midwife's cries. You approach the leper colony, its wooden palisade weathered, the air thick with damp earth, wood smoke, and a faint, sour scent of decay that unsettles you. A muddy path winds past crude huts, their straw roofs sagging, and a small chapel stands forlorn, its cross tilted. You are surrounded by a hushed desolation. Lepers in tattered cloaks shuffle slowly, some with bandaged limbs, others ringing bells to warn of their approach. Your tunic itches, your sandals squelch as you near a communal fire, where a leper named Simon, his face scarred and hands wrapped in rags, tends a pot of thin gruel. You notice his eyes, weary but kind, though his halting gait betrays the disease's cruel advance. You are here to visit the leper's shunned world, a place of exile where disease and stigma intertwine, and you realize compassion is as scarce as cure, heart quickening as you tread cautiously among the outcasts. You settle by the fire, its weak flames barely cutting the chill, as Simon ladles gruel into a wooden bowl, offering it with a nod, his voice raspy. Eat, traveler, for warmth's sake. You sip the watery broth, its blandness a grim echo of Marjorie's pottage, and note his bandaged fingers, trembling from leprosy's nerve damage. You are struck by the isolation. Leprosy here is not just a disease, but a sentence, banishing victims from village life to this bleak enclave, where survival hinges on charity and endurance. You are tempted to ask about his past, but a leper's cough from a nearby hut pulls your focus, and you wonder how these outcasts bear such shunning, your pulse rising as you navigate the colony's somber air, wary of the plague's ever-present shadow. Here is the principal historical fact in medieval Europe. From approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, leprosy, Hansen's disease, was a widespread and feared condition, leading to the establishment of leper colonies where victims were isolated due to social stigma and misunderstanding of contagion, as evidenced by church records and archaeological sites. You observe Simon now, his hands stirring the pot with slow care. Caused by Mycobacterium leprae, leprosy resulted in skin lesions, nerve damage, and disfigurement, spreading through prolonged contact, though less contagious than believed. Leper colonies, often supported by monasteries or towns, housed thousands, with victims required to wear bells or distinctive clothing to warn others. During the Black Death 1347-1351 CE, lepers faced heightened fear, as plague amplified distrust of the afflicted. You consider Simon's bell, recognizing its mark of exile, and you begin to admire the leper's resilience, enduring shunning with little more than gruel and faith. You strive to blend in, but your grimace at the broth elicits a faint smile from a leper woman, who tosses you a small dried pear, murmuring, "Chew for solace." You bite the tough fruit, grateful, and notice she wears a wooden pendant carved with a dove, perhaps a leper's token. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval leper colonies, some residents wore dove pendants, wooden or bone charms with dove or cross designs as symbols of hope or divine protection, believed to comfort the soul or ease suffering, a practice found in colony artifacts, but seldom in written records. You examine the woman's pendant, pondering whether it holds faith or fellowship, and it offers a quaint insight into how lepers sought solace amid exile, turning wood into talismans against despair's shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Simon calls you to help tend the fire, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to flinch at the colony's damp chill. You begin to sense the colony's rhythm, a fragile pulse of survival amid stigma and sorrow. You overhear a leper lament a forsaken family lost to village fear, prompting hushed murmurs from his companions. You catch Simon's weary glance, his cough echoing the hut's unease, and it dawns on you leprosy not only scars bodies but severs bonds, with shunning threading through every shared bowl or whispered prayer. You recall Joan's childbirth cries, where peril bound the village, and recognize this colony as a lonelier stage, where lepers' isolation amplifies the Black Death's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did medieval leprosy's stigma primarily stem from religious beliefs or medical fears? Some scholars assert that religious views associating disease with sin drove exclusion, as seen in church edicts. Others argue that medical fears, misunderstanding leprosy's spread, fueled isolation, a perspective in medical histories. You observe Simon's bandaged hands, wondering if it's scripture or science, and lean toward religion. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a sermon's text over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the colony, to an extent. You learn to move quietly, endure the tunic's damp itch, and keep the fire steady to avoid sparks. You pass the pair's pit to a scrawny sparrow perched on a fence, earning a flutter, and refocus on Simon, who shows you how to stir gruel without scorching it. You are fumbling, your hands clumsy, but his raspy encouragement steadies you, heart racing. You begin to grasp why lepers' shunned existence defined this medieval world, not mere disease, but exile, testing their resolve in every weary step. You glance at a passing leper, his cough echoing the colony's dread, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. The plague's sorrow deepens, but you are hooked on its outcast struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the colony's gloom fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the woman's dove pendant vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the forsaken family, Joan's cries, and all the lepers enduring exile in those bleak huts. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another outcast's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating shunning without spilling gruel or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the colony's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this disease-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart the leper colony's desolate huts, the mournful clang of Simon's bell still echoing in your ears like a Subura outcast's lament fading into dusk. Your wool tunic clings damply, stained with colony mud, your straw sandals frayed from its muddy paths. The leper woman's dove pendant, carved to soothe exile, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a token of your somber visit to a shunned world. The air shifts from decay's sour tang to a smoky, bustling reek as you return to the English town's marketplace, its cobblestone streets alive with trade, yet shadowed by fear. It is 1350 CE, and the Black Death's terror amplifies another affliction, misunderstood minds. You are drawn to a market stall where a crowd gathers, whispering of a mad woman's strange behavior. Welcome to a world of mental health myths, where you uncover medieval views on mental illness. Fair warning, it is stranger than a Subura soothsayer's tale, and navigating this web of superstition will test your empathy more than a leper's gruel. You step into the marketplace, its cobblestones slick with refuse, the air thick with the stench of rotting vegetables, spilled ale, and the faint metallic tang of a butcher's stall. Wooden booths line the square, vendors hawking bread, wool, and wilted herbs under sagging awnings. You are surrounded by townsfolk merchants in greasy cloaks, apprentices dodging carts, and a priest muttering prayers for plague's end. Your tunic itches, your sandals squelch as you near a stall where a woman named Maud, her hair wild and eyes darting, mutters to herself, clutching a tattered shawl. A crowd murmurs, some jeering, others crossing themselves, as a town elder named Godfrey declares her touched by spirits. You notice Maud's trembling hands, her words a jumble of fears and pleas, hinting at a mind unmoored. You are here to uncover medieval views on mental illness, a realm of fear and folklore where suffering is misjudged, and you realize compassion is as scarce as cure, heart quickening as you tread cautiously among the jeers. You edge closer to the stall, the crowd's murmurs pressing in, as Godfrey calls for a priest to cast out Maud's demons. A vendor named Ellen, her apron stained, offers you a clay cup of watery cider, her voice low, "Drink, traveler," to steady the soul. You sip the tart brew, its bite sharper than Simon's gruel, and note her wary glance at Maud, tinged with pity yet fear. You are struck by the misunderstanding mental illness here is not a condition but a curse, blamed on sin, spirits, or stars, with no remedy beyond prayer or punishment. You are tempted to speak for Maud, but a priest's arrival, brandishing a cross, pulls your focus, and you wonder how anyone endures such stigma, your pulse rising as you navigate the market's tense air, wary of the plague's ever-present shadow and the crowd's fickle mood. Here is the principal historical fact in medieval Europe. From approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, mental illness was poorly understood, often attributed to supernatural causes like demonic possession or divine punishment, leading to stigma and harsh treatments, as evidenced by church records and medical texts. You observe Maud now, her shawl slipping as she mutters, ignored by the priest's chants. Conditions like melancholy, mania, or epilepsy were seen as spiritual afflictions, treated with exorcisms, pilgrimages, or confinement, rather than medical care. During the Black Death 1347-1351 CE, social stress and loss exacerbated mental distress. Yet humoral theory imbalancing the bodous fluids offered little insight, with no concept of psychological causes. Townsfolk feared the mad, isolating or punishing them, amplifying suffering. You consider Maud's darting eyes, recognizing their silent plea, and you begin to admire her resilience, enduring scorn with little more than a tattered shawl and fleeting hope. You strive to blend in, but your frown at the priest's chants elicits a knowing nod from Ellen, who tosses you a small dried plum, murmuring, "Chew for peace." You bite the tart fruit, grateful, and notice she wears a copper bracelet etched with a star, perhaps a protective charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval towns, some folk wore star bracelets, copper or bronze bands with celestial motifs as wards against mental affliction, believed to align the mind with heavenly order or repel evil spirits, a practice found in market artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine Ellen's bracelet, pondering whether it holds superstition or sympathy, and it offers a quaint insight into how townsfolk sought to shield against the madness they feared, turning metal into talismans amid mental health's myths. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Godfrey calls you to help restrain Maud, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to recoil at the crowd's jeers. You begin to sense the market's rhythm, a volatile blend of trade and trepidation. You overhear a merchant lament a crazed son locked away to spare shame, prompting hushed murmurs from vendors. You catch Ellen's pitying glance, her hands twisting her apron, and it dawns on you mental illness not only torments minds, but fractures bonds, with stigma threading through every whisper or wary glance. You recall Simon's leper colony, where isolation marked the afflicted, and recognize this marketplace as a crueler stage, where myths about madness deepen the Black Death's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate: did medieval views on mental illness primarily stem from religious dogma or social anxieties? Some scholars assert that religious beliefs linking madness to sin or demons drove stigma, as seen in ecclesiastical texts. Others argue that social anxieties, fearing disruption in tight-knit communities, fueled exclusion, a perspective in social histories. You observe Maud's trembling form, wondering if it's faith or fear, and lean toward religion. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a sermon's tone over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the market, to an extent. You learn to stand discreetly, endure the tunic's sweaty cling, and keep your hands gentle to avoid startling moth. You pass the plum's pit to a scrawny sparrow perched on a stall, earning a flutter, and refocus on Ellen, who shows you how to steady Maud's arm without force. You are fumbling, your grip awkward, but her quiet nod steadies you, heart racing. You begin to grasp why mental health myths define this medieval world, not mere superstition, but a barrier, testing compassion in every scornful jeer. You glance at a passing priest, his cough echoing the market's dread, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. The plague's terror persists, but you are hooked on its misunderstood struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the market's jeers fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, Ellen's star bracelet vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the crazed son, Simon's exile, and all the souls shunned for their minds in those crowded squares. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another myth's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating stigma without spilling cider or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the town's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this disease-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart the bustling marketplace, the harsh jeers at Maud's troubled mind still ringing in your ears like a Subura crowd's taunts fading into twilight. Your wool tunic clings damply, stained with market grime, your straw sandals slick from cobblestone sludge. Ellen's star bracelet, etched to ward off madness, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a token of your unsettling dive into medieval mental health myths. The air remains thick with rotting vegetables and fear as you linger in the English town, its streets shadowed by the Black Death's grim toll. It is 1350 CE, and amidst plague and stigma, another silent threat flows through every well-tainted water. You are drawn to a public well near the town square, where townsfolk queue for a drink that harbors hidden poisons. Welcome to a world of contaminated water, where you grapple with the unseen toxins that sicken daily life. Fair warning, it is murkier than a Subura puddle, and navigating this liquid peril will test your caution more than a market scorn. You approach the well, its stone rim mossy and cracked, the air heavy with damp earth, refuse, and a faint metallic tang from a rusty bucket swaying on a frayed rope. Wooden stalls encircle the square, vendors hawking bread and cloth, their voices mingling with the creak of carts and a dog's bark. You are surrounded by townsfolk merchants in soiled cloaks, women balancing buckets, and children splashing in a nearby gutter, their faces flushed with exertion or fever. Your tunic chafes, your sandals slip as you join the queue, drawn by the well's promise of relief, though its water glints with an unsettling murk. A water seller named Thomas, his hands chapped, fills buckets for a penny, his eyes wary as he glances at a woman coughing nearby. You notice his leather belt, heavy with tools, and his grim nod, hinting at the water's dubious safety. You are here to grapple with the hidden poisons in medieval drinking water, a daily necessity that breeds disease, and you realize each sip is a gamble, heart quickening as you await your turn at the well. You stand closer, the bucket's creak grating your nerves as Thomas hauls up water, its surface speckled with grit and a faint oily sheen. He offers you a wooden ladle, his voice gruff, "Drink, traveler," but sparingly. You sip the cold liquid, wincing at its earthy, metallic bite, sharper than the market cider, and note his cough, a rasping echo of the town's pervasive ills. You are struck by the danger water here is not life, but a lurking threat, tainted by unseen poisons that sicken the unwary. You are tempted to ask about the well's purity, but a child's retching nearby pulls your focus, and you wonder how townsfolk endure such risky sips, your pulse racing as you navigate the square's crowded bustle, wary of the plague's shadow and the water's silent menace. Here is the principal historical fact in medieval Europe. From approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, contaminated drinking water was a major health hazard, spreading diseases like dysentery, typhoid, and cholera due to poor sanitation and lack of germ theory, as evidenced by urban records and archaeological well studies. You observe Thomas now, his hands dipping the ladle with weary routine. Towns relied on wells, rivers, and springs, often polluted by human and animal waste, tannery runoff, or latrine seepage, with no filtration or treatment. During the Black Death 1347–1351 CE, waterborne illnesses worsened mortality as weakened populations drank from tainted sources, unaware of bacterial pathogens like Salmonella typhi. Ale or wine, boiled or fermented, were safer but costly, leaving water as a perilous necessity for most. You consider the ladle's murky contents, recognizing their toxic potential, and you begin to admire the townsfolk's endurance, risking each sip with little more than grit and prayer. You strive to blend in, but your grimace at the water elicits a wry chuckle from a washerwoman, who tosses you a small crust of rye bread, murmuring, "Eat to settle the stomach." You chew the stale morsel, grateful, and notice she wears a small cloth sachet tied to her belt, embroidered with a wave pattern, perhaps a water charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval towns, some folk wore wave sachets, cloth pouches with wave or fish motifs believed to purify drinking water or protect against its ills, a practice found in market artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the washerwoman's sachet, pondering whether it holds superstition or solace, and it offers a quaint insight into how townsfolk sought safety from tainted wells, turning cloth into talismans against water's hidden poisons. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Thomas calls you to help haul a bucket, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to gag at the water's gritty aftertaste. You begin to sense the square's rhythm, a tense pulse of necessity and dread. You overhear a merchant lament a sickened family struck after drinking from a river, prompting hushed murmurs from vendors. You catch Thomas' grim glance, his cough echoing the market's unease, and it dawns on you tainted water not only sickens bodies but binds fates, with fear threading through every dipper or shared cup. You recall Maud's marketplace stigma, where madness drew scorn, and recognize this well as a subtler stage, where water's poisons deepen the Black Death's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did medieval water contamination primarily result from urban overcrowding or inadequate infrastructure? Some scholars assert that dense populations overwhelmed sanitation, as seen in town layouts. Others argue that poor infrastructure lacking pipes or waste systems caused pollution, a perspective in environmental histories. You observe the well's mossy rim, wondering if it's crowds or construction, and lean toward infrastructure. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a well's depth over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the market, to an extent. You learn to queue patiently, endure the tunic's sweaty itch, and keep the bucket steady to avoid spills. You pass the bread's crumbs to a scrawny sparrow perched on a stall, earning a flutter, and refocus on Thomas, who shows you how to haul water without straining the rope. You are fumbling, your arms aching, but his gruff nod steadies you, heart racing. You begin to grasp why contaminated water defined this medieval world, not mere necessity, but a silent poison, testing townsfolk's resolve in every murky sip. You glance at a passing child, her cough echoing the square's dread, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. The plague's menace persists, but you are hooked on its liquid struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the well's reek fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the washerwoman's wave sachet vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the sickened family, Maud's scorn, and all the townsfolk risking water in those crowded squares. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another poisoned secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating peril without spilling cider or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the town's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this disease-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart the town's murky well, the gritty aftertaste of Thomas' tainted water still clinging to your throat like a Subura puddle's lingering dregs. Your wool tunic is damp with market sweat, streaked with cobblestone grime, your straw sandals worn from queuing. The washerwoman's wave sachet, embroidered to purify water, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a token of your uneasy grapple with water's hidden poisons. The air shifts from refuse and ale to a smoky, acrid reek as you approach a nearby English village, its lanes scarred by recent conflict. It is 1350 CE, and the Hundred Years' Wars raids, coupled with the Black Death's toll, wreak havoc on civilian health. You are drawn to a ravaged hamlet, where war's impact unfolds in grim devastation. Welcome to a world of war's health havoc, where you endure the toll of conflict on civilian lives. Fair warning, it is bleaker than a Subura battlefield, and surviving this wartime ordeal will test your resolve more than a well's murky sip. You enter the village, its timber cottages charred and broken, the muddy lane littered with shattered carts and trampled crops. The air is heavy with ash, rotting straw, and a faint metallic tang of spilled blood, a grim echo of the town's marketplace stench. You are surrounded by weary survivors, peasants in tattered cloaks, children clutching sticks, and a woman named Cecily, her face gaunt, tending a fire of scavenged wood. Your tunic chafes, your sandals squelch as you near the fire, where Cecily boils a pot of nettle broth, her hands trembling from hunger or fear. You notice her arm, bandaged with a soiled cloth, and her hollow eyes, hinting at wounds and want left by raiders. You are here to endure war's impact on civilian health, a chaos that breeds famine, injury, and disease, and you realize survival is a fragile thread in this war-torn hamlet, heart quickening as you tread cautiously among the ruins. You settle by the fire, its weak flames barely warming the chill, as Cecily ladles broth into a cracked bowl, offering it with a weary nod, her voice faint. "Eat, traveler," to stave off weakness. You sip the bitter liquid, its sting sharper than Marjorie's pottage, and note her cough, a rasping echo of the village's pervasive ills. You are struck by the devastation. War here is not just battle but a scourge, stripping food, safety, and health from civilians already battered by plague. You are tempted to ask about the raiders, but a child's whimper from a nearby hut pulls your focus, and you wonder how villagers endure such havoc, your pulse rising as you navigate the hamlet's smoky air, wary of the Black Death shadow and war's cruel aftermath. Here is the principal historical fact in medieval Europe from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE. Warfare, such as the Hundred Years' War 1337-1453 CE, severely impacted civilian health through famine, injury, and disease, exacerbating existing health crises like the Black Death, as evidenced by chronicles and archaeological sites. You observe Cecily now, her hands scraping the pot for scraps. Conflicts disrupted agriculture, with armies burning crops and seizing livestock, leading to starvation and malnutrition. Raids caused physical injuries, cuts, burns, or broken bones with no advanced medical care, while displaced populations spread diseases like dysentery or plague. During the Black Death 1347-1351 CE, war's chaos worsened mortality, as weakened civilians faced Yersinia pestis without resources. You consider Cecily's bandaged arm, recognizing war's brutal mark, and you begin to admire the villagers' tenacity, scraping by amid conflict's ruin with little more than broth and grit. You strive to blend in, but your grimace at the broth elicits a faint nod from a passing villager, who tosses you a small parsnip, murmuring, "Bite for endurance." You gnaw the woody root, grateful, and notice he wears a leather cord around his neck, knotted with a charred twig, perhaps a war charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval war-torn villages, some survivors wore twig cords, leather straps with charred wood or stone fragments as talismans to ward off further violence, believed to appease war spirits or mark resilience, a practice found in rural artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's cord, pondering whether it holds hope or hardship, and it offers a quaint insight into how villagers sought protection amid war's havoc, turning twigs into charms against chaos shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Cecily calls you to help gather firewood, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to flinch at the hamlet's acrid air. You begin to sense the village's rhythm, a broken pulse of survival amid ruin and dread. You overhear a man lament a raided harvest stolen by soldiers, prompting hushed curses from neighbors. You catch Cecily's anguished glance, her cough persisting, and it dawns on you war not only wounds bodies but shatters lives, with hunger and fear threading through every scavenged stick or whispered plea. You recall Maud's marketplace stigma, where madness drew jeers, and recognize this hamlet as a harsher stage, where war's health havoc amplifies the Black Death's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did medieval warfare's health impact primarily stem from direct violence or indirect disruption? Some scholars assert that violence, injuries, and killings drove mortality, as seen in battle accounts. Others argue that disruption, famine, and disease from ruined crops or displacement caused greater harm, a perspective in social histories. You observe Cecily's frail form, wondering if it's swords or starvation, and lean toward disruption. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a raid's toll over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the hamlet, to an extent. You learn to gather wood quietly, endure the tunic's smoky itch, and keep the fire steady to avoid sparks. You pass the parsnip's peel to a scrawny sparrow perched on a fence, earning a flutter, and refocus on Cecily, who shows you how to stack kindling without toppling it. You are fumbling, your arms weary, but her faint encouragement steadies you, heart racing. You begin to grasp why war's havoc defined this medieval world, not mere conflict, but a health crisis, testing villagers' resolve in every scavenged scrap. You glance at a passing child, his cough echoing the hamlet's dread, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. The plague's misery deepens, but you are hooked on its wartime struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the hamlet's ash fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villager's twig chord vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the raided harvest, Maud's stigma, and all the villagers enduring war in those charred lanes. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another conflict's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating ruin without spilling broth or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the hamlet's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this disease-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart the war-torn hamlet, the acrid sting of Cecily's nettle broth and the charred ruin of her village still heavy in your senses like a Subura battlefield's smoldering aftermath. Your wool tunic clings damply, streaked with ash and mud, your straw sandals frayed from scavenging firewood. The villager's twig cord, knotted to ward off violence, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a token of your grueling endurance of war's health havoc. The air shifts from ash and despair to a faint scent of incense and damp stone as you return to the English village, its lanes hushed under a gray dawn. It is 1350 CE, and amidst the Black Death and the 100 Years' War, the church stands as a beacon of hope, offering spiritual healing where earthly remedies fail. You are drawn to the village church, where the faithful seek health through religious practices. Welcome to a world where faith battles disease, where you seek solace in prayers and relics. Fair warning, it is holier than a Subura shrine, but navigating this spiritual quest will test your hope more than a war-ravaged broth. You approach the church, its stone walls weathered, the air rich with beeswax, frankincense, and the damp musk of ancient wood. A wooden cross looms above the door, and a bell tolls softly, calling the weary to prayer. You are surrounded by villagers, peasants in patched tunics, women clutching rosaries, and children with gaunt faces, their coughs echoing in the nave. Your tunic itches, your sandals creak as you step into the dim interior, drawn by a priest named Father Anselm, his vestments frayed, leading a mass for the sick. You notice his hands, steady as he raises a chalice, though his eyes betray exhaustion, perhaps from endless vigils for plague victims. You are here to seek health through religious practices, a blend of prayer, relics, and pilgrimage that promises divine cure, and you realize faith is both shield and burden in this disease-ravaged world, heart quickening as you kneel among the hopeful. You settle on a cold stone bench. The incenses swirl, clouding your senses, as Father Anselm chants a Latin prayer, beseeching God to heal the afflicted. A woman named Agnes, her face pale, offers you a small bread roll blessed at the altar, her voice trembling. Eat, traveler, for God's grace. You nibble the dry morsel, its faint sweetness a contrast to Cecily's bitter broth, and note her rosary, clutched tightly, her lips moving in silent supplication. You are struck by the fervor. Religion here is not mere ritual, but a lifeline, with prayers and relics seen as potent against plague, famine, and war. You are tempted to ask about the bread's blessing, but a man's hacking cough nearby pulls your focus, and you wonder how faith sustains these villagers, your pulse rising as you navigate the church's solemn air, wary of the Black Death's unseen menace. Here is the principal historical fact in medieval Europe. From approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, the Catholic Church played a central role in healthcare, offering spiritual remedies like prayers, relics, and pilgrimages to combat disease, particularly during crises like the Black Death, as evidenced by ecclesiastical records and hagiographies. You observe Father Anselm now, his chalice gleaming as he invokes divine mercy. The Church viewed illness as divine will or sin's consequence, prescribing masses, confessions, and veneration of saints' relics to restore health. During the Black Death 1347-1351 CE, churches became sanctuaries, with pilgrims seeking cures at shrines like St. Thomas Becket's, though such gatherings often spread Yersinia pestis. Monasteries and clergy provided alms and care, but spiritual remedies offered no biological defense. You consider Agnes' rosary, recognizing its desperate hope, and you begin to admire the faithful's devotion, seeking divine aid with little more than bread and prayer. You strive to blend in, but your hesitation at the bread elicits a gentle nod from a villager who passes you a small beeswax candle, murmuring, "Light for healing." You grasp the waxy stub, grateful, and notice he wears a pewter badge pinned to his cloak, shaped like a cross, perhaps a pilgrim's token. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some pilgrims wore cross badges, pewter or lead pins with cross or saint motifs as proof of shrine visits, believed to carry healing blessings or ward off disease, a practice found in church artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's badge, pondering whether it holds sanctity or sentiment, and it offers a quaint insight into how the faithful sought divine protection amid plague, turning metal into talismans against death's shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Father Anselm calls you to help light candles at the altar, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to cough in the incense-heavy air. You begin to sense the church's rhythm, a solemn pulse of faith and fear. You overhear a woman lament a plague-cursed son lost despite prayers, prompting hushed murmurs from the congregation. You catch Agnes' fervent glance, her rosary clicking, and it dawns on you religion not only offers hope, but bears sorrow, with doubt threading through every candle or chanted plea. You recall Cecily's war-torn hamlet, where hunger fueled despair, and recognize this church as a sacred yet fragile stage, where spiritual healing battles the Black Death's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate. Did the church's healing role in medieval health primarily provide psychological comfort or reinforce harmful superstitions? Some scholars assert it offered comfort, easing fear through ritual, as seen in devotional texts. Others argue it reinforced superstitions, tying illness to sin and delaying medical progress, a perspective in religious histories. You observe Anselm's raised chalice, wondering if it's solace or shackle, and lean toward comfort. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a relic's power over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the church, to an extent. You learn to kneel quietly, endure the tunic's smoky itch, and keep the candle steady to avoid drips. You pass the candle's wax scraps to a scrawny sparrow perched on a sill, earning a flutter, and refocus on Father Anselm, who shows you how to arrange candles without snuffing them. You are fumbling, your hands shaky, but his calm nod steadies you, heart racing. You begin to grasp why the church's healing role defined this medieval world, not mere ritual, but a refuge, testing faith in every flickering flame. You glance at a passing villager, his cough echoing the knave's dread, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. The plague's terror persists, but you are hooked on its spiritual struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the Church's incense fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villager's cross badge vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the plague-cursed son, Cecily's wounds, and all the villagers seeking health in those sacred walls. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another prayer's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating fear without spilling ale or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the village's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this disease-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart the village Church's solemn nave, the heady swirl of Father Anselm's incense, and the flicker of blessed candles still clouding your senses like a Subura shrine's fading glow. Your wool tunic clings damply, scented with wax and dust, your straw sandals creaking from stone floors. The villager's cross badge, pinned to seek divine healing, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a token of your hopeful quest for health through religious practices. The air shifts from incense to a damp, earthy reek as you linger in the English village, its muddy lanes shadowed by the Black Death's relentless grip. It is 1350 CE, and amidst plague and war, superstition weaves a tight web over health, blending fear with folklore. You are drawn to a wise woman's hut on the village edge, where townsfolk seek her charms against disease. Welcome to a world of superstition-driven health beliefs, where you face the strange rituals that guide medieval medicine. Fair warning, it is odder than a Subura fortune teller's brew, and navigating this web of beliefs will test your skepticism more than a priest's prayer. You approach the wise woman's hut, its wattle walls patched with moss, the air thick with burning herbs, stale straw, and a faint tang of vinegar from a simmering pot. A gnarled oak looms overhead, hung with dried bones and feathers, swaying in the breeze. You are surrounded by a wary few peasants in ragged cloaks, a merchant clutching a pouch, and children peering from behind a fence, their coughs echoing the village's dread. Your tunic itches, your sandals squelch as you step through the low door, drawn by the wise woman, Mother Elspeth, her face lined, stirring a cauldron with a wooden spoon. You notice her hands, stained with berry juice, and her sharp eyes, scanning you as she mutters a charm against fever. You are here to face superstition-driven health beliefs, rituals born of fear and folklore, and you realize these charms offer more hope than cure in a plague-ravaged world, heart quickening as you brace for the hut's strange rites. You settle on a stool, the cauldron's steam prickling your skin, as Mother Elspeth sprinkles dried yarrow into the pot, chanting words you cannot parse, promising to ward off plague. A villager named Joan, her face pale, offers you a clay cup of herbed ale, her voice trembling. Drink, traveler, for luck's shield. You sip the bitter brew, its tang sharper than Father Anselm's blessed bread, and note her fidgeting hands, clutching a knotted cord, perhaps a charm against illness. You are struck by the ritual superstition here is not mere folly but a desperate grasp, blending herbs, chants, and talismans to defy disease where medicine fails. You are tempted to question the chant's power, but a man's rasping cough from the doorway pulls your focus, and you wonder how villagers cling to such beliefs, your pulse rising as you navigate the hut's smoky air, wary of the Black Death's unseen menace. Here is the principal historical fact in medieval Europe. From approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, superstition heavily influenced health practices, with folk beliefs in charms, omens, and magical cures shaping responses to disease, particularly during the Black Death, as evidenced by folkloric records and ecclesiastical critiques. You observe Mother Elspeth now, her spoon stirring with practiced rhythm. Lacking germ theory, people attributed illness to supernatural causes, curses, evil spirits, or celestial alignments, using amulets, chants, and herbal concoctions to counter them. During the Black Death 1347-1351 CE, Fear amplified reliance on wise women and cunning men who offered rituals like burying charms or reciting spells, though these did nothing against Yersinia pestis. Such beliefs often clashed with church doctrine, yet persisted among peasants and nobles alike. You consider Elspeth's yarrow, recognizing its symbolic hope, and you begin to admire the villagers' tenacity, seeking solace in superstition amid plague's terror. You strive to blend in, but your grimace at the ale elicits a knowing glance from a villager who tosses you a small dried acorn, murmuring, "Hold for health's guard." You grasp the rough seed, grateful, and notice he wears a leather strip around his neck, tied with a snail shell, perhaps a protective charm. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some folk wore snail charms, leather cords with snail shells or bone fragments believed to absorb illness or deflect curses, a practice found in rural artifacts but seldom in written records. You examine the villager's charm, pondering whether it holds folklore or fear, and it offers a quaint insight into how superstition gripped health beliefs, turning shells into talismans against disease's shadow. You are inclined to inquire about it, but Elspeth calls you to help grind herbs, and you focus on the task, suppressing your urge to sneeze in the hut's pungent air. You begin to sense the hut's rhythm, a fervent pulse of ritual and desperation. You overhear a woman lament a cursed fever blamed on a neighbor's envy, prompting hushed murmurs from the group. You catch Elspeth's sharp glance, her chant unbroken, and it dawns on you superstition not only shapes cures but sows distrust, with fear threading through every charm or whispered spell. You recall Father Anselm's church, where prayers offered solace, and recognize this hut as a wilder stage, where superstition's grip deepens the Black Death's toll. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate: did superstition-driven health beliefs primarily empower communities or hinder medical progress? Some scholars assert they empowered, giving agency through ritual, as seen in folk practices. Others argue they hindered, delaying rational medicine by prioritizing magic, a perspective in medical histories. You observe Elspeth's yarrow brew, wondering if it's strength or stagnation, and lean toward hindrance. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a charm's origin over conceding both factors' roles. You adapt to the hut, to an extent. You learn to grind herbs carefully, endure the tunic's smoky itch, and keep the mortar steady to avoid spills. You pass the acorn to a scrawny sparrow perched on a rafter, earning a flutter, and refocus on Elspeth, who shows you how to crush yarrow without wasting it. You are fumbling, your hands clumsy, but her curt nod steadies you, heart racing. You begin to grasp why superstition's grip defined this medieval world, not mere belief, but a desperate shield, testing villagers' hope in every chanted spell. You glance at a passing villager, his cough echoing the hut's dread, and breathe cautiously, the Subura's torchlight calling you back. The plague's terror persists, but you are hooked on its superstitious struggle. You return to the Subura's lanes, the hut's herbs fading, the stars faint above the thatched roofs. Your heart quickens, the villager's snail charm vivid in your mind, the amulet and charcoal stick heavy in your pocket. You pass a hut where a woman weaves by candlelight, and you are tempted to linger, but your legs ache. You think of the cursed fever, Father Anselm's prayers, and all the villagers chasing charms in those smoky huts. You are uncertain how you will endure another day here, let alone another superstition's secrets, but you are more resilient than you thought, navigating fear without spilling ale or your cover. You head toward your rented room, the village's pulse faint under the night, ready for the next chapter in this disease-riddled tale, eager to unravel more of its tangled woes. You depart Mother Elspeth's smoky hut, the pungent whiff of her yarrow charm still clinging to your senses like a Subura soothsayer's brew fading into dusk. Your wool tunic is damp with village mist, streaked with herb dust and mud, your straw sandals frayed from muddy lanes. The villager's snail charm, tied to deflect curses, lingers in your memory, alongside the clay hand amulet, charcoal stick, and paint-stained rags tucked in your pocket, each a token of your bewildering encounter with superstition's medical grip. The air remains heavy with damp earth and fear. As you linger in the English village, its lanes shadowed by the Black Death's relentless toll. It is 1350 CE, and amidst plague, war, and folklore, you pause to reflect on the enduring lessons of medieval health's grim realities. You settle on a worn bench by the village green, the stars faint above sagging roofs, ready to weave together the threads of disease, despair, and defiance you have witnessed. Fair warning, it is weightier than a Subura chronicle, but reflecting on these lessons will test your perspective more than a wise woman's chant. You lean back, the bench creaking under you, the village asleep, its hearths dimmed under a gray sky. You have traversed a medieval tapestry of health's perils, Agnes' village fever, Beatrice's filthy streets, Edith's plague-stricken child, Lord Reginald's dung poultices, and Brother Thomas' herbal hopes. You have endured Master Roger's bloody knife, Marjorie's starving gruel, Joan's deadly labor, Simon's leper exile, Maud's scorn madness, Thomas' tainted well, Cecily's war wounds, Father Anselm's prayers, and Elspeth's charms. Each trial from pestilence to superstition reveals a world where health was a fleeting dream, yet resilience shone through every cough, charm, or candle. You are struck by the legacy medieval health struggles not only shaped an era but echo in modern medicine's triumphs, from sanitation to science. You think of Simon's dove pendant, Agnes' rosary, and the Subura's distant glow, realizing these lessons are timeless, heart as a bridge to today's fight for wellness. You are ready to unpack their lasting impact, weaving a tale that endures beyond the plague's shadow. You shift, the amulet heavy in your pocket, and picture the villagers you have met: Ellen's pitying glance, Cecily's bandaged arm, Joan's pained cry, each a thread in a saga of survival. These weren't mere ailments, they were battles, binding medieval folk to modern lives through shared struggles against disease. You hold the charcoal stick, its tip worn from sketching your journey, and marvel at the lessons reach: how filthy streets spurred sewers, how plague inspired quarantine, how superstition paved the way for science. You think of today's vaccines, clean water, and mental health care, seeing the medieval grit in every hospital's hum or healer's oath. You are starting to feel the weight of medieval health, not just its misery, but its legacy, a foundation of endurance, whispering lessons of resilience from village wells to modern labs. Here is the principal historical fact: medieval Europe's health crises, from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE, profoundly influenced modern medicine and public health, with the Black Death and other challenges driving innovations in sanitation, quarantine, and medical inquiry, as evidenced by historical records and epidemiological studies. You trace the stick's grain, pondering the legacy's scope. The Black Death, 1347-1351 CE, killing millions, prompted early public health measures, like isolating the sick, while urban filth led to later sewer systems. Superstitions, though flawed, spurred herbal studies, feeding into pharmacology, and the Church's care laid roots for hospitals. Medieval struggles, malnutrition, leprosy, mental illness highlighted human vulnerability, shaping modern responses to disease, from germ theory to global health policies. You consider Elspeth's yarrow, recognizing its echo in today's medicines, and you admire the medieval resolve that forged these advances, leaving lessons for a healthier world. You reflect further, recalling a moment in Elspeth's hut, her chant for fever's end, mirrored in a modern doctor's vow to heal, both bound by hope. This introduces our curious historical detail. In certain medieval villages, some healers used healing knots, cords tied with specific patterns to seal charms believed to bind health's blessings for future generations, a practice found in folk artifacts but seldom in texts. You picture Elspeth's knotted cord, wondering if she tied such a knot, and it offers a quaint insight into how medieval health beliefs sought to endure, turning cords into symbols of hope's legacy. It is a clever nod, showing how lessons were woven to outlast plague, waiting for new healers to untie them. You are tempted to sketch a knot, but your stick is blunt, and the Subura's dawn calls you back. You sense the depth of medieval health's lessons, not just their pain but their permanence, like a chronicle etched in time. You think of Maud's stigma, Simon's exile, and all the souls whose struggles shaped a healthier future: plague victims, lepers, midwives, monks. These trials were not just for their day, they were for us, whispering resilience through wells, churches, and modern clinics. from tang chants to today's cures. This leads to a matter historians continue to debate: does medieval health's legacy primarily reflect human endurance or systemic failure? Some scholars assert it showcases endurance, with communities adapting despite limits, as seen in survival rates. Others argue it reveals failure, with inadequate systems prolonging suffering, a view in medical histories. You hold the amulet, its clay a link to Agnes village, and lean toward endurance. Yet, consensus eludes, as scholars prefer to dispute a cure's root over conceding both factors' roles. You stand, stretching your weary legs, and step toward the green, the village's faint glow softening its muddy lanes. You think of Beatrice's filth, Roger's blade, and all the trials that forged health's lessons. You have survived a journey barely through plague, war, and superstition, each peril a testament to medieval grit and grace. You are uncertain how they endured tainted wells or burning fields, but you are tougher than you thought, carrying their legacy in your inky hands and heavy heart. You are ready to leave this Subura, but for now, you linger, the village's pulse syncing with yours, medieval health's lessons a quiet hum under the stars. You stand by the village green, the Subura's dawn soft as a whisper, its mist curling like smoke from a medieval hearth. The Arno hums, a lullaby older than plagues, carrying away the village's echoes. Agnes cough, Jones cries, Elspeth's chants. Your amulet rests heavy in your hand, a small anchor to a world that endured, its clay worn smooth by timeless trials. The village sleeps, its roofs warm, and you feel medieval hopes, gentle as starlight, blending into dreams where wells run clear and fields bloom. Your breath slows, matching the green's quiet pulse, and you imagine drifting on the Arno, a reed boat rocking you toward slumber. Let the village hold you, its lessons soft as moonlight, its struggles warm as embers. Sleep now, carried by resilience that endures, gentle as a sigh, eternal as the night.